This video is brought to you by Brilliant.
Poland's economy has had a great few decades. Since the fall of communism, GDP per capita has increased 13-fold, and thanks to its remarkable resilience during the 2008 financial crisis, Poland enjoyed 30 years of continuous growth before the pandemic, a European record. But while Poland's headline growth numbers still look pretty great, especially by European standards, structural weaknesses in the Polish economy are becoming increasingly apparent. So, in this video, we thought we'd take yet another look at Poland's record-breaking economic boom, and why the next few years might prove to be a bit more difficult.
Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell.
So let's start with a quick recap, because Poland's recent economic history is pretty crazy. Poland was essentially a Soviet satellite state for most of the 20th century, which meant Poland was governed by a communist party loyal to Moscow, the Polish United Workers' Party, or PZPR. The Polish economy was centrally planned, but the PZPR weren't very good at central planning. Poland's GDP per capita grew by less than 2% a year between 1970 and 1990, and according to World Bank data, in 1990, just after the fall of the Soviet Union, Poland had a GDP per capita of just $1,700, about a tenth that of the European community at the time, and roughly the same as Haiti today. In the early 90s, Poland rapidly transitioned from a centrally planned communist economy into a market-oriented capitalist economy via a process that's since become known as shock therapy. Broadly speaking, shock therapy involves four things. 1. The liberalisation of essentially all prices, which would have been previously set by the government. 2. The privatisation of major industries previously owned by the state. 3. The removal of international trade barriers which were put up by communist regimes to encourage economic self-sufficiency. And finally 4. Tight monetary and fiscal policy in order to reduce any subsequent inflation. At the time, shock therapy's advocates claimed that it was necessary to prevent the old political establishment from pulling Poland and other post-communist states back into communism, and pointed to the economic success of countries like West Germany, which had moved rapidly from a centrally planned economy during the war to a free market economy afterwards. But shock therapy is generally pretty miserable. It involves both a lot of economic upheaval and a period of severe austerity, and for the vast majority of post-communist countries, it didn't really work. Probably the best example is Russia, where Boris Yeltsin's attempt at shock therapy in 1992 triggered a bout of hyperinflation and an economic contraction that essentially crippled the Russian economy for a decade. In Poland, however, shock therapy worked remarkably well. After a dramatic spike in 1990, when prices were first liberalised and year-on-year inflation peaked at nearly 600%, inflation stabilised around 10% towards the end of the 90s. This is obviously still pretty high, but it wasn't so high that it destabilised the wider economy, and, unlike most other post-communist countries, Poland's economy grew steadily throughout the 90s, with GDP per capita nearly tripling between 1990 and 2000. Why shock therapy apparently worked in Poland but not in other post-communist states is still hotly debated by economists today, but it probably has something to do with the fact that Poland's post-communist government had more popular legitimacy than its counterparts, and pursued a staggered process of price liberalisation. Anyway, Poland's growth rate then accelerated in the 2000s, especially after its accession to the European Union in 2004. This was both because Poland received massive amounts of EU funding, but also because its entry into the single market gave Polish businesses a new market to sell to. Poland developed an especially close economic relationship with Germany, with many German companies setting up shop in Poland to take advantage of the well-educated but relatively cheap workforce. For all these reasons and more, Poland's economy boomed throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, with GDP per capita rising from about $5,000 at the turn of the millennium to $22,000 in 2023, the latest year for which World Bank data is available. Other data suggests that the Polish economy has continued to grow at an impressive rate since, with Poland's Stat Office indicating that GDP grew by 2.9% in 2024 and further 0.7% in the first quarter of this year, making it the fastest growing large economy in the EU. The European Commission expects this trend to continue, forecasting 3.3% growth in 2025 and 3% growth in 2026. Unsurprisingly, these impressive numbers, especially when compared with the stagnant performance of Europe's other big economies, have inspired a string of headlines about Poland becoming Europe's next economic power. However, while the Polish economy is clearly doing pretty well, there are at least three caveats worth mentioning here. The first is that quite a lot of this growth is being driven by government deficits. The Polish government ran an enormous deficit representing 6.6% of GDP in 2024, and is expected to continue running deficits of this size for the foreseeable future. Because government spending is one of the 4 components of GDP, budget deficits, which don't require GDP dampening tax hikes, create a temporary but unsustainable boost to GDP. The relationship here isn't straightforward. It's not like a 6.6% deficit automatically adds 6.6% to GDP. But a deficit of this size will still create a pretty big boost. While Poland isn't at risk of a debt crisis anytime soon, its debt to GDP ratio currently sits at about 55%, well below the EU average of 81%, a deficit of this size will nonetheless have to come down eventually, taking GDP growth with it. The second caveat is Germany. As we mentioned a moment ago, the Polish and German economies are very much interconnected, which means that if Germany, and big German companies with investments in Poland like Volkswagen, Siemens and Mercedes-Benz, continue to struggle, Poland will be affected. You can already sort of see this if you dig into Poland's GDP data. Growth in 2024 was mostly driven by government spending and domestic consumption, and net exports actually shrunk, in part because the stagnant German economy wasn't buying that many Polish exports. The third caveat is demographics. We've done a whole video on this before, but the TLDR is that Poland has one of the worst demographic crises in Europe, if not the world. The latest birth data implies Poland currently has a fertility rate of just 1.1, well below the so-called replacement rate of 2.1, and below every other EU country apart from Malta. And this looks unlikely to improve, given that successive Polish governments have introduced generous tax breaks and handouts for new families to no avail. Poland's population is therefore due to age and eventually shrink in the coming decades, putting immense strain on public finances. All in all, while the Polish economy is undeniably strong, and its burgeoning tech industry and impressive education levels provide it with some solid growth drivers, there are clearly some caveats worth mentioning that are sometimes overlooked in more boosterish analyses. Like a lot of things right now, this topic is incredibly complex and ever-changing, and here at TLDR, we're committed to learning more to help us understand the world around us. Luckily for us, our sponsor this week, Brilliant, helps us do just this. We know that learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do, both for personal and professional growth, and Brilliant helps you get smarter in minutes a day. You can even perfect your skills wherever you are, whether you're on the go or winding down. It's the opposite of mindless scrolling. Brilliant has the perfect mix of engaging problems, competitive features, and daily encouragement keeps you motivated and on track. For instance, Brilliant's data science content uses real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions. No matter your level of skill, these courses are perfect to start or continue learning data analysis, with a full suite of content covering data visualizations, algorithms, regression models, and more. Learn how to parse and visualize massive data sets from brands you know to make them easier to interpret. Plus, all content on Brilliant is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers and professionals from Stanford, MIT, Caltech, Microsoft, Google and more. To try Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, scan the QR code on screen or you can click on the link in the description. By doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription and they'll know you came from us, which really helps us out.